Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, The Reunion, live on Netflix. It's on. Let's watch.
Character-wise and all of these things, but that's not to say that there wasn't something missing. I think that that part of it is true, but it's just kind of, it is what it is. You know, some people connect in that way and are able to show that, and that just wasn't evident in our relationship at that point in time. So
yeah, so he's saying that, yeah, sure, aesthetically, I guess if you look at the color of their hair, then sure, they're very similar, but he's pointing out that their personalities are really quite different, which we could imagine. And we'll take his word for it. And he's, I don't know, there's just, I don't know if I have confirmation bias, but he seems to be saying a lot of things that are at least confirming, based on my confirmation bias, that according to him, which we don't know, he didn't feel nurturing or warmth from her. And when they're alone, there wasn't that sort of, I don't know, that sort of feeling that someone looks at you and then you mutually look at each other and you're just like, I want to be with you. Let's talk. Let's roll around together. Let's be together. And how are you doing? And, oh, I love that about you. You know, the way that Tiffany and Brett are with each other.
open to that occurring, but it just didn't happen in the timeline that we had.
Didn't evolve in the experience.
Then why did I not hear about it until Friday? I've never heard that from you. You've never brought that up to me.
We were done dating like 12 months ago, you know?
You didn't tell me while we were engaged. You didn't tell me when we dated after the show.
Okay. So, I don't know. This all kind of points in the direction that Micah was in this relationship for real. Because this is the sort of thing that someone would say spontaneously on a live television show of someone that felt like they are hurting that they were broken up with, right? Like, we all do this when we're dumped. Just like, how come you didn't give me a chance? How come you didn't work harder for the relationship? Why didn't you tell me? Because I could have changed it. Then maybe we would still be together.
I've never heard this until I saw it on TV.
I'm not going to criticize you and be like, you know, oh, you need to be more nurturing. You need to, like, that has to be something that comes organically.
If it's the reason to say no at the altar, it's something that I should have been told.
Yeah, I don't know. I can see both sides. They're certainly free to say these sorts of things. You know, for him, I think what he's saying is, if I would have said something to you, I don't think it would have changed who you are. That's my conclusion. I think that's what he's saying. I wouldn't want you to manufacture a part of your personality. I just wish he was more descriptive about what he's saying, because I think there's a lot there. But again, I don't know if he has a very refined, or he's trying to avoid being upfront about what he thinks, or I don't know. But you can absolutely see her as well. It's just like, wait, so that was a major reason why you didn't say yes at the altar? Like, you could have told me, because maybe I wasn't being nurturing or affectionate towards you because I didn't think you wanted it. Maybe I was suppressing a part of myself because I thought that's what you wanted. Like, why didn't you say something?
Or talk to about and not be blindsided.
Can I say something?
Sure. Zach, you want to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Paul the night before the wedding. I mean, he was up till, I think we were talking at like 2 a.m. at night.
Yes, that was probably a very long talk between the two of you.
Yeah. And
as a subtle dig at their long-windedness, which, you know, I could relate to that myself.
Paul had no idea, like, he was completely torn. He, up to that point, I can tell you how long we talked about the decision he was going to make, and I think he was genuinely 100% in love with Micah.
Wow. That's really important that Zach said that. That's really, I'm really glad that he did, because that really says something, right? That behind the scenes, unfilmed, untalked about, he was the night before very much on the fence and showing a lot of signs that he was 100% in love. That, I don't know why, but that somehow is more comforting. I think partially because I just don't want to, this will help Micah, hopefully, right? That she will feel like it wasn't a flippant, because the way that Paul is talking about it and the way he's framing the relationship, even when he was with Micah, it seems like you could imagine Micah walking away just being like, I don't get it. I felt you didn't care. You didn't care to tell me. you were secretly judging me as a bad mom. What is this? What's happening? And so Zach is, definitely helping in this moment. Also, for me, I just like it when I see evidence that things are real on a reality TV show. Because it is so much, even if it's painful, it's as a viewer, it just feels so much, because, these shows take us on a roller coaster, and if it's all scripted and made up and not real, then it feels like I'm being tricked or I'm an idiot or something.
To take a jump. And Paul really thought about this incredibly deeply. It wasn't something that he just was like.
And I don't think that any of us take for granted,
No.
we don't think that you threw it to the wind, but I think that Micah did bring up a good point, that if that is the reason or the biggest reason that maybe you said no, I think that she's right. She deserved to know, and especially.
Yeah, I don't know. It's possible that for Paul, he has that perspective of, I just don't think we gel in that way. I think it's just a compatibility issue. I don't think if I would have told her, it would have changed anything, because it was just one of those things that is either there or it's not there.
Gosh, she felt. She was about to say yes.
Sure, I can agree with that. Like, I could have done a better job of communicating the things that I felt that were missing.
Did you think she was just incapable of that change? Like, why wouldn't you have brought that up?
No, I don't think that she's incapable of it, but I think it's something that should occur organically, not me demanding, like, hey, you be the.
Right. I think he's saying that. Now, I would hope that he would really emphasize that there's nothing wrong with Micah, even if he thinks there is, because it would be a nice thing because he wouldn't know for sure if there's something wrong with Micah, but he could at least offer up that side of that equation for him and say, look, I don't think there's anything wrong with Micah, but I'm just saying that the way we came together, I would like to think that she would have that vibe or that organic attunement and warmth and nurturing with someone else. But with the two of us, it just wasn't there. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying anything about her. I'm just saying the way the two of us were together. And maybe I was to blame partially because I didn't also create that, or I didn't give off the vibe that I wanted that or something, I just wish he would say something like that.
You can't just request people to be a certain way, and then all of a sudden they are and then they end up, if they do that and they just change themselves to please you, eventually they're going to begin to resent that.
Yeah. I think he is saying more and more along the lines of what I think he is thinking.
And then your relationship will dissolve. So it has to be organic. It has to be natural.
Another character people remember is Micah's friend Shelby.
So looks like they're done talking about it. But I will reiterate that for Paul, it's possible that he is just as much responsible for that vibe that he's looking for, and that he's putting too much of that responsibility on other people. Because we could absolutely imagine Paul also not being not only nurturing, but also not alerting other people that they want to be that they should be nurturing to him. And we could imagine Micah being provoked to being nurturing if he exhibited, I don't know, maybe not.
Do you actually think she was right in retrospect when she said that he wasn't the right one for you?
I think a lot of Shelby's concerns lied in the fact that things were moving too quickly.
I wonder what Paul's attorney just told him. In my head, Zach's like, okay, don't get triggered. Don't get into it, because you don't want to come across like a jerk face. I'm guessing something like that.
I mean, she didn't know if it was going to work, and she didn't want me to have my heart broken, which it did. And that way, I think she was right.
Yeah, I worried about that at the time, that Shelby could be right, but not for the right reasons. And that would solidify not only their dynamic, which I think is, at least the way we saw it, was highly problematic for both of them, but particularly for Micah and anyone that Micah wants to be with. But it would also solidify Shelby's self-centered idea that she's always right, and that she can read people from the very beginning based on no information. Now, you could argue that maybe she was picking up on Paul's lack of enthusiasm, even from his first reaction, even from him answering those very short questions, like, what was it like when you saw her? Or I can't remember. It was these questions that why do you love her, or something like that. And there were questions that for him in his style that he just has a very long-winded answer to. He doesn't have that quick romantic answer. And I said at the time that those quick romantic answers that are often given on shows like this, I don't feel them. They seem like the sort of thing that you say in a Hallmark card and not the sort of thing that you really think or feel. I don't know. So he could have done a little better to try to reassure the friends, but he's entitled to answer the question as he did, and they didn't really give him a chance to answer. So, is it conceivable that the friend did pick up on something kind of and like went with it too far, but was ultimately, I guess, right? I don't know. Yeah, I did worry about it at the time. Like, if this doesn't go well, I would hate it if Shelby walked away saying like, "See, I was right." So I'm going to continue to do this all the time. I'm going to judge everyone based on no information, and I'm going to ruin everyone's night because I know best.
I think she has a terrible delivery, which I understand. I do too. But she never wanted me to get hurt. That was the bottom line. She never wanted me to run off the altar crying. She never wanted me to have a failed marriage, and that's where so much of her...
I mean, ironically, the way that Shelby reacted and perhaps the way that Micah didn't react, meaning that Micah didn't immediately go to Paul and say, "I'm so sorry about that. Like, she is that way sometimes, and I don't know. I don't know if we can be friends." Who knows? Paul might have had that as a major reason as to why he didn't want to be with her, right? So this notion that Shelby was detecting something, it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Her feelings came from. And I think even when they first met at Shelby's birthday party, I remember my friends asked Paul, like, what do you love about Micah? And he was like, "I don't know." And it wasn't because he didn't.
That's not what happened. He was beginning to launch into at least one paragraph, and he has a very obscure-ish way of talking. It does lack a little empathy, I would say, because if he had empathy for Micah, and I'm not saying he lacks empathy, I'm saying that he doesn't account enough for how his responses might affect other people in those moments. I think he's mainly in his own head of just like, okay, let me answer that question, instead of also, which is great, but also considering, okay, these three people, they're on the edge of their seat. What could I do right off the bat to relax them a little bit? And then I can launch into my paragraphs. He could have just said, "Oh my God, there's just so many things I love about her. She's just so great. It's just so hard to put into words. Let me give it a shot." That would have probably put them at ease. Now, I don't know if Shelby would have ever been put at ease, but at least it would have put Micah at ease. But Micah is remembering it, at least from my memory, differently than what actually happened.
Love me. I know he loves me or loved me. But a lot of their concern came from it didn't feel natural.
Was that a Freudian slip? I know he loves me. I don't know. Sometimes Freudian slips are used in a way. So let me describe Freudian slips very briefly. Sigmund Freud had a lot of ideas, and the general public and a lot of people in my field have a very simplistic understanding of what Sigmund Freud talked about. He had a very long career. It spanned 50, 60 years, so many publications. Behind me, one of the shelves behind me, I don't think you can see it. Half of the shelf is just Sigmund Freud in it, and I only have about maybe a third of his publications. And so he talked about a lot of things. He threw a lot of stuff out there. He changed his mind throughout his career, and he didn't have the benefit of all the psychological research and the institutions we have today. He was inventing a new field and was completely flying blind, and so he would have to come up with ideas on his own without colleagues. He would have to figure things out on his own, and a lot of the things that he figured out still hold true today. They are just givens that we just like, well, isn't that just a given? No, a lot of the things that Sigmund Freud really had to fight for people to recognize as a possibility, today we just think it's obvious, but it's not, clearly, because in the past, they thought he was an idiot for everything that he said. Now, there are some things that he said that are considered to be quite silly today, but again, there were a lot of things that he said. Anyway, point is one of the things that he put out there was that we have an unconscious. There's a part of our brain that operates outside of consciousness. And It has a lot of aspects to it. There are a lot of manifestations of it, including just the fact that you don't have to think about breathing. You don't have to think about the way that we talk. I don't have to think about all the muscles that are involved in me saying the sentences I'm saying. When I'm walking, I don't have to consciously stay balanced because these are unconscious processes that operate outside of my consciousness, and they operate very obviously, right? So if we extend that to a lot of different aspects of life, one of the unconscious manifestations is that we will have these needs or these issues that are not aware to us. We don't have conscious awareness of it, or it's mostly unconscious. And we have a need or a pressure or a dynamic where it needs to express itself and needs to be satisfied. And we can talk about the id. We could talk about the different drives that he put forth, psychosexual stages, and there's just a lot to talk about. If you just read the synopsis, it'll sound really silly, but the way that they thought about it back then, and the way that current psychoanalytic people think about it today is much more understandable, much more relatable if you know the topic the way that people in my area do. Anyway. So I'll say that, but one of the ideas was that with Sigmund Freud, he talked a lot about, especially in one lecture that he gave, which they put to paper and published. A lot of his publications were lectures that he gave, and they were formal lectures and speeches, if you will. And one of them was around this idea of what would eventually be called Freudian slips. And the idea is that, say you wish that someone loved you, and you can't accept the data that's being presented to you that Paul doesn't love you, and you long for him to be back. There's a connection that is still there. And he talked about catharsis and cathexis and the libido and different connections that we have. He had a whole kind of system. And it still basically stands true, but it denied attachment theory and culture often. He did talk a little bit about culture, but most people didn't understand the aspects of culture and privilege and other kinds of issues. So anyway, and the idea is that for the way that they might describe it, at least in the way that I would phrase it, is that it's possible that she, in her unconscious, has still not accepted and still not been okay with the notion that Paul doesn't love her and doesn't want to be with her, which is natural. And she's still holding on because it's natural to do that. And as a way of expressing that, because the unconscious needs that to come out. When something is being tamped down, it needs to somehow express itself. And also, you could argue that the unconscious is trying to tell the individual or tell the world something by alerting about certain things. And the way that it can do that is to make mistakes in our speech. Say that you are feeling very pressured by your boss and you are trying to put on a very pleasant face because you really need this job and you don't know what to say, you're not very assertive, and deep down, unconscious, you have a lot of anger and a lot of resentment toward your boss, which would be natural. But you have no conscious awareness of it because you're suppressing it for various reasons. And as you're talking to your boss, you're saying something like, you intend on saying consciously to them, so would you like me to take this knife? Say you're working at a McDonald's, you're talking to your boss, you'd be like, so do you want me to take this knife and put it in the drawer? And you have a Freudian slip and you say, so would you like me to take this knife and shove it in your heart? Put it in the drawer. I mean, that's an extreme example, but you get the picture. So you could say in this moment, possibly that was a slip that she had, that unconscious revealing of itself that she still actually believes that he's in love with her or can't accept the data that's suggesting that he doesn't love her, which should be natural. And so that's when she said what she said. Now, Freud famously said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, meaning that sometimes a cigar isn't always a symbol of a phallus. And that's when we start to get into all the silliness of penis envy and all that stuff, which has been refuted.
I don't know. And it wasn't because he didn't love me. I know he loves me or loved me.
It's a long shot, but it just gave me an opportunity to talk about Freudian slips. And I suppose for yourself, one of the possible things that you can do is when you have a slip, just have a question mark on it. Be like, is something going on? The better we know our needs, the better we can meet them. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you really deserve it. You really, really do.